And at this time, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Pete Hammond.
So for the next hour, you're in for a real treat here because we have one of the best actors in the world to sit here and talk to SAG. So without further ado, he's an Oscar winner for Shine, an Emmy winner for The Life and Times of Peter Sellers, a Tony winner for Exit the King, and so many other awards, SAG awards, everything. Please welcome Geoffrey Rush. Hey. Yeah. Well, that was good. I've never seen somebody like point out the ones that weren't standing.
It's a real matinee crowd.
It's great. Well, welcome here. Welcome to SAG Foundation, and congratulations on your latest film, The Book Thief. Great reviews. Terrific movie. Yeah. Which we'll get to as well, and we have all your questions too. But I know actors, they love to know how you made it, how you got into this world, and you're a creature of the theater. I mean, you really are, and that's where your beginnings certainly were. How did you become an actor?
I can't quite work this out. It's either because my mother and father divorced when I was 5, and I developed a sort of narcissistic complex as a way of coping with that sense of dislocation. But I don't think it was that. Secondly, I started doing it when I was in primary school. The teacher was always getting me up to do skits in front of the class, just what we wouldn't have called improv at the time, but that's what it would be. And then I did things at high school. We had, in the days before official drama teachers, we had this particular pretty industrial, working class, sporty kind of high school, young high school that I went to. There were 3 women, a very nice art teacher, a really great music teacher, and a fabulous English teacher, and they encouraged us to do lunchtime plays, and then we started to do full-length plays, which is quite amusing for me now because my son's just finished high school. At high school now, they do things like The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui.
Oh, my God.
That's the stuff. We were doing Arsenic and Old Lace, that sort of thing. So I found at an early age that I liked it a lot, and I got to be quite good at it, or it certainly gave me an identity as a very non-sports person in the school. So for, 1 school concert a year and maybe 3 nights of a play, I had a little taste of, the magic or whatever. And the third thing, I suppose, is just I like showing off. I've really learnt to enjoy. Like I did direct for a while, up until about 20 years into my career, I directed things as well as acted. But I realized eventually, not only in the theater, but also in the circle of wagons that make up the trailer unit base on a film, I realized I really enjoyed being, with the camaraderie of all that, I enjoyed being a dressing room slut.
No. Okay. People are going, yeah.
They know what I'm talking about.
That's wild. So do you remember your first play, your first professional thing? It was like over 40 years ago now, I guess, in the early 70s?
Yes. Well, no, actually, it really happened to me, for me when I was about 7. I think it's the time and place that you're born in. I could probably say Australia in the 50s in my childhood and the 60s in my teenage years was a bit of a backwater, seemingly. We didn't, our film industry had kind of collapsed in the 30s. We had a very, substantial silent film and early talkies film industry because the Lumiere brothers came out in the 1890s with all their new cameras, and they filmed the Melbourne Cup, and I reckon that had a big impact on people wanting to make movies there. In fact, I think our biggest year of production was 1911, and no one's quite topped the output from that.
They're still trying.
But anyway, I caught the tail end of traveling, variety, and vaudeville. And there used to be this company called Sawleys who would do regional tours with a maybe 1,500, 2,000-seater tent with a canvas proscenium arch down one end. There was no fly tower. All the curtains they ruched like that. That's why I wanted to be an actor. I liked watching that thing happen. And we in the English tradition, but it had already become an Australian tradition, well over a century old. You would see a Christmas panto or a holiday season pantomime of Cinderella or Jack and the Beanstalk. And I was fascinated by the fact that the main male role was always played by the soubrette of the company. So it was like a breeches part back in the old classical days. The woman would be, with fabulous legs and fishnet stockings, would play Jack. And Jack's mother would always be played by the pantomime dame. And I used to love that duality of knowing that was a guy, but he was so convincing as Jack's mother, and in my own reality, he was probably as old as my grandmother was then. But my grandmother was a very loving, nurturing, wonderful woman. She didn't take pratfalls or fall over the way he did. Do you know what I mean? So yes. there was just something about the level of theatrical excitement for me at 7 was huge. So I also learned how to be a good audience member, I think. I get a bit tired now when everything is so interactive.
Oh.
And,
God, yeah.
Well, interactive seems to mean that people tweet garbage while television's on. And I think, that's annoying me reading that rather puerile opinion while these people are actually talking serious journalism or something. My belief is when you're in an audience, if an actor excites their imagination, the transcendent engagement is that the audience's imagination will be very excited, and I can probably count on two hands some theatre that I've seen that has just absolutely blown my mind, and that's the drug, and that's why you have to keep going back for more.
You still do it. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about that kind of switch early on when you saw the theatre early on, because you did a couple of years ago, you played Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest, which is not exactly, if I was just thinking of casting, would I think of Geoffrey Rush, but why?
No, I think I'd reached a point where I could. I just said, I'd like to play Lady Bracknell, and they said, all right. No, what had happened is that we had done this production back in 1988 where I played Jack, and my wife, Jane, played Gwendolyn. And it was a very, very popular, and it toured for years, and it was all over the country, and it was in our repertoire for about 4 or 5 years or something. And then a couple of years ago, several members of the company had since died, but there were 3 or 4 of us left, and we decided to remount the production because it was a rather beautiful, timeless, very fresh design based on the aesthete's Bible. It was a yellow book set on a large black disc, and the book would open, and there were Aubrey Beardsley pop out a drawing room, and then the next scene, and in between the scene changes, the actor who played Lane and Merriman would open the book to kind of a master of ceremonies. Anyway, it was a very nice design, and we didn't think it had dated at all. So we sat around one day and said, "Oh, why don't we do it again?" And my wife then, everyone went up a rung. You know, she went up from playing Gwendolyn to playing Miss Prism, right. And Bob, this other wonderful character actor who played Chasuble, was now going to play Merriman, etc. And I'd more or less said, "But what can I do? I don't really want to be Canon Chasuble." And they said, "Look, you should play Lady Bracknell." So I yielded very, very readily.
And how was that experience for you? Did you enjoy
it? It was important. I mean, it was one of those things where, you know, I come from a very much, totally from a subsidised, non-for-profit theatre world in Australia. You know, it's all the major state theatre companies that are primarily funded by the government. But of course now that subsidy's dropped right away, and there's a lot of philanthropic and sponsorship and all that sort of stuff. With that kind of ensemble, it was very important for me to treat it as the classic that it is, and not in any way turn it into a commercially spun, top billing. You know, we were all billed equally on the poster and all of that sort of tradition. And I was very keen to play her as a very credible woman, and try and remove some of the baggage that seems to accumulate around plays like that. She always seems to be a 70-year-old harridan, and because my daughter, the actress, very fine comedian who was going to be playing Gwendolyn, was blonde, I thought, oh, a blonde Lady Bracknell is kind of interesting. That's the genetic, you know, history. So I tried to play her as a borderline menopausal 50-year-old Victorian woman who still felt when she entered a room that there was a lot of pheromones in the air. And there's enough detail in the script that, you know, her marriage to Lord Bracknell is not active, but she channels all of that into her rather monstrous social behavior.
It's a great play. That's one that I did in high school when I was trying to be an actor. I did The Importance of Being Earnest and played Merriman, 8 entrances. I thought I had the hardest thing in the thing because it was like you had like one line each. It was not easy, but it's a timeless play. I'm just wondering, you talked about the drugs, the drug of the theater. Do you have a drug for movies too, or do you get more excited by doing theater? Is this something that just...
No, they only became, you know, I sort of developed a mid-career shift when I was 44. Up until then, I'd worked only in the theatre, but I was a huge film fan, and had been. I was having a conversation with someone the other day. I saw one of the earliest films I can remember seeing. Again, split parents. You know, we'd go for a holiday down the Gold Coast, and of course they would go and see a double bill of movies, and I'd often fall asleep when I was 7 by the second film. Mm-hmm. But I remember seeing things like Three Little Words, which was about the songwriting team, Bert Kalmar and Al Jubin or something like that.
One of the MGM musicals.
Yeah, Red Skelton was in it, I remember. But most significantly was Russ Tamblyn in Tom Thumb.
Ah, I love that movie.
Which must have, I think, still in my mind, has the most dazzling special effects for that era. You know, they had stop motion puppeteering and all sorts of stuff.
That was like 1958.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that he hid in the horse's ear at the end. I mean, they were I loved all that. But then I mostly got into the great American tradition of, you know, from Garfield to Shelley Winters to Brando, De Niro, Pacino, particularly in the early 70s when Nicholson and all those people were in these extraordinary films that meant, pop culturally meant so much to us who were, I don't know, intellectual hippies or counterculturalists from the university. It just seemed like a really rich time for not only films that connected very strongly, but also allowed for, which is another thing that I'm fascinated by, also allowed for unashamed, genuinely virtuosic work. Mm-hmm. You know, when I first saw, say, someone like Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, and then a year later he was in John and Mary, and then he was in Little Big Man, and then he was in Midnight Cowboy, and I think he only did a film a year or something, and I went, wow, these guys are just blasting these roles really out of the ballpark, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's like so much. When you mentioned Tom Thumb too, I was sort of going into the cast list there. Peter Sellers was in that
Yes.
movie, and did you think
Terry
sitting there,
Thomas, yes.
that you would ever like wind up playing
No.
Peter Sellers?
No, no idea. No, that you know, for us then, maybe in that period, I think I saw The Shira Lee with Peter Finch, who was English but grew up in Australia and acted there. Our homegrown industry from the 30s to the 70s kind of didn't exist. So it was very unusual to think that a film could even be made in Australia, you know. Even when we were doing Year 12, running our own school drama club, once those teachers had got married or transferred or whatever. Michael Powell, who was, I think, kind of banned from England because of Peeping Tom.
Oh.
He came to Australia and he made a film with a very young Helen Mirren and James Mason called Age of Consent, which was based on an old Australian novel. And we just couldn't comprehend that they were actually shooting a film in Queensland. Do you know what I mean? We went to the movies to see American or UK culture.
Wow.
And ultimately, you know, Italian and Russian and so forth.
And you did, when you finally got into the movies, you did a few small roles, but then you just hit that magic role. I mean, Shine in 1996 was I imagine, just sort of a mind-bending experience, because it just, I think, changed everything for you.
Well, you know, there was a great excitement from the mid-70s onwards, and I'd been studying in Paris at that time, and saw most of the initial wave of films like the Peter Weir films, The Last Wave, or Picnic at Hanging Rock, or Fred Skepsi's Jimmy Blacksmith, and Bruce Beresford, Gillian Armstrong. There was a genuine renaissance. And I saw most of those films in European film festivals and couldn't believe that I was hearing people from my own country in these stories. You know, it was fantastic. But my theatrical career kind of kept growing, and I was always in work, and I got to be a regular member of several long-term ensembles, which I really liked, and never felt jealous of my film fraternity actors, you know. And at that stage, they were doing a lot of pioneering kinds of films, and you sort of had to look good on a horse with your shirt off. I wasn't going to ask anyone to pay money to see that. But ultimately in my theatrical career, I was kind of, because I was freelancing a lot as well, and I would really pursue work in Adelaide or Brisbane or Melbourne or Sydney or wherever. And I was trying to tick off all the great clown, ratbag, rogue, fool roles in Shakespeare, and I managed to do quite a few. So when the screenplay for Shine came along, it was the first time that I thought, this is actually kind of my territory, but it's a very unusual, it read like a very unusual film. And in fact, when we first started to promote it here in North America, the response from most of the critics and the journalists was, because they'd just been seeing Strictly Ballroom and Priscilla and Muriel's Wedding, what some wag called the fruit salad school, which I thought was pretty good. They were thrilled and surprised that we'd actually created a drama. And in a way, there was something about David Helfgott's extraordinary holy fool kind of quality. I looked at him, I mean, I spent quite a bit of time, not so much with him, but a lot of audio tapes of him, because Scott had interviewed him endlessly to get the story of what his family background's like. Plus also back in the 80s when he'd first made his reappearance in these wine bars and stuff, most major current affairs shows had done programs on that fascinating story, so I got to look at a lot of that. But I just sensed something in the script above and beyond, or maybe wanting to avoid it falling into the tricky areas of biopic cliches. I tried to think of it as a classical role, and that he was like a holy fool, and the piano was his domain, where he felt that was his home base, So yeah, it was. But it was a $4 million film. We were shooting on the streets of Adelaide, and I was just excited that my pay packet for being in an Australian film, that sort of flat film rates, was maybe 5 or 10 times bigger than the $700 I was getting a week in the subsidized theatre.
Wow. So were you prepared at all, though, for what happened after that? You won every award there was to win, I think, for that role. And obviously it opened up a whole new world in Hollywood movies. Is that something that's made you happy, that pay packet that you get now?
No, look, I was quite prepared to think of it as a potential one-hit wonder. Even in the promotion of it, I thought, I've got nothing to lose. This is great. I can always go back and work in the theatre, but I was having such an adventure, traveling with this film into the Denver Film Festival, where I got to meet a childhood hero, Chuck Jones, who's a god to me. I got to meet him there, which was wonderful. We took it to the New Orleans Film Festival, Chicago, whatever. And then, over a period of about 2 months, around this time in '96, I would just get a call every week from Fine Line saying, oh, you've just been given the New York Film Critics Circle Award or something. Come back, because we can get a better type of press. You know what I mean? And I must have commuted about 8 times in 2 months, just coming back and forth, because my kids were quite young at the time. And I just relished all of that. And then when it went on that journey, there is a very interesting trajectory. On one of those visits, it was the first time I'd been in New York City, and I was standing on the sidewalk outside this really nice Italian restaurant, having a cigarette, and a guy walked past and went, hey, loved your movie. And I thought, this is unbelievable. You know what I mean? 2 weeks later, I come back and I'm at LAX, and a student comes up to me with a backpack and says, excuse me, are you Mr. Rush? I really liked Shine. I went, oh, thanks very much. I thought, wow, this is amazing, because the film was widening, and I think it started on 6 screens or something. 2 weeks after that, I'm at LAX. The cleaner went, hey, Piano Man. It was really hilarious. And then then it reached the point where, when it got nominated for an Oscar and everything, people would say, "You were great in Shine," or "I saw Shine," and blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, a couple of months after that, people would say, "I loved your movie," because they'd forgotten my name and the title of the film. And then there was, when I was shooting Elizabeth, this would have been late 97, and I was walking down Park Lane, and I saw this guy walking towards me, and you just get that little thing of, you can see him going, I know you. And he walked by and he went, "Oh, That was it. It was hilarious. Wow. And I thought then at that time, you know, I think the studios had problems probably trying to work out what they might do. I remember I was offered the role of Liberace. I don't think it's the same script that's just been done so brilliantly recently. But at that stage, I thought, look, the last thing, look, you know, it's like if I'd been in a Western, they were saying, well, find him another Western.
Right.
And they were going, find him another piano film. And it was the last thing I wanted to do. And quite by fate, I ended up in 2 Elizabethan films back to back. And I thought this really could be a career suicide in a way, because that genre hadn't been done successfully since the 60s. You know what I mean? That period of Glenda Jackson and Mary Queen of Scots and Anne of 1,000 Days, all those sorts of things. But I loved that. I just loved that period of history and felt very closely associated. And Tom Stoppard's screenplay for Shakespeare in Love was just brilliant.
And another Oscar nomination, so that was not a bad deal to wind up in the Elizabethan era for you. And of course, both those pictures were nominated for Best Picture, so they were widely seen too, very popular movies. You know, when you said one-hit wonder, you thought maybe it would be a one-hit wonder. I look at the names of the movies, you know, Shakespeare in Love, all the Pirates of the Caribbean. You're so great in those movies. Fun with you and Johnny Depp, Peter Sellers, King's Speech, another great one. Wells is the Marquis de Sade. Is there anything in there that just stands out for you? Do you have a personal favorite that you've done, or are they all your children?
No, they're all like children. I don't know. I do have a genuine sort of. When I read a script, it generally talks very immediately to you if you think this is something that would be good to be involved in. Not so much to do with, oh, I know how to do that. In fact, I annoy my agents and people because I turn things down a lot and go, it's not me. I think that belongs to some other actor, you know, because it takes me a while to maybe gravitate towards it. Or from my old repertoire days of being in the theatre, you were players cast, and whatever you'd be doing by night, you'd be rehearsing something completely different by day. And I've always had that thing where I try and find an antidote to what I've just been doing. Do you know what I mean? So that if, you know, in the wake of having done Lady Bracknell, and I've satisfied my deep yearnings to be a musical theatre lead, because I've always been a huge Broadway fan. I played Pseudolus in The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which is just a great comedian's role in a really outrageously brilliant farce. And it was in the wake of that when I read The Book Thief, it might have been a role that I might normally have gone, I don't know if I want to do that, or I don't know if I can bring anything specific to it. But there was just something about the quiet stillness and the hidden inner life of a relatively simple German house painter and sign writer that appealed to me as an antidote to being, you know, handbagging.
But that's such a great movie too. And how many have seen The Book Thief so far? Those of you who haven't, you got to go see it. It just went nationwide, I think, just this weekend, and did very well. But that's an interesting movie because we rarely see World War II, Nazi Germany, from the point of view of the Germans, just these ordinary Germans in this ordinary town, and it's just eye-opening almost, and it's very human film, too.
Yes, well, look, the source material, which I can also heartily recommend to everyone in the room, the novel that Marcus Zusak wrote is, I think, a true literary masterpiece. And I think that's the great gift that he's given to readers, is that he does talk about, he talks more about the excitement of storytelling and how much that impacted on his childhood and teenage years, because both his German parents, he said, were fantastic storytellers. And it's about the stories they told about their parents during the Second World War that inspired him as a teenager to think about writing this as a book. And, you know, it is set in, you know, probably one of the most horrific periods of humankind, I think. You know, I think the statistics, if I'm right, that in that global war, we forget, you know, because my stepdad was fighting in Borneo, Australians were in Africa, the British and the French were in all over Europe, Russia, Japan, the Pacific theater of war. It was huge. 65 million deaths, you know. So it sometimes annoys me slightly because there's been a little bit of critical backlash against our film being too sweet. Or do we really need to keep telling Holocaust stories, you know? And my belief is that when 65 million people die in a period of about 6 or 7 years, there are many angles and many stories to be told about how that happened and why it hopefully should never ever happen again.
And I don't think a film that's actually narrated by death can be called too sweet. You know? It's a very unique structure that this movie has, and different from the book, too. You had not read the book when you were offered this, right? Or you hadn't, your daughter had, I guess, or...
I know that the book has been initially promoted as a young adult literature piece in the States, but initially when it was first published in Britain and Australia, it was a novel, and it had a huge adult readership. And I believe it was on the New York Times bestseller list for something like 250 weeks or something like that. It's, you know, 5 years or something. Huge.
I'd never heard of it before.
But no, my daughter saw the screenplay on my desk and said, "Are they making a film about the book thief?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh my God, that book changed our lives." Oh my God is what all 15-year-olds say when they... That wasn't the important part. The important part of that sentence was that she used the word book.
Ah.
And that it had changed their lives,
Right.
I thought was absolutely fantastic. And she said, "What role are they offering you?" "Death." Because the whole novel is narrated by death, but that'll go better when I do that joke at a house when more people...
I've seen them.
So, no, I said it's Hans Huberman, and they were very, very excited by that.
Hans is it's a great role for you too. Another one in the great. Is there one role that I'm going to go to the audience questions now, but I'm just curious. Is there one role that you haven't played on stage that you've always wanted to, or that's something that's just there that is, you know?
No, no. I pursued a certain repertoire at a point, and I suppose because I was freelancing a lot, and I have had a very long-term theatrical collaboration with one director. We've probably done about 17 or 20 things together. Exit the King was one of those.
Yeah.
but I always gravitated towards what I call the grubby end of the classical spectrum. I've never played a Hamlet, I've never played a Richard III or the big verse parts. But I love doing things like Ben Jonson's The Alchemist, Gogol's Government Inspector. They're always fairly rat-baggy,
Right.
but great, what we call great parts. You know.
Interesting. Okay, so we got some questions from the audience that you filled out before you came in, and I'm going to read them here because we have a few minutes. Oscar Zanetti, where's Oscar? Right there. Hi, Oscar. How did you surpass the moments of adversity and rejection in your early career? Thanks. You always get this from a group of actors here. That's why I put it on top.
Look, to be honest, when I said dressing room slut, I used that quite accurately. I haven't had many extended periods of being out of work. I think a lot of that is partly luck or being readily available to kind of dance with the circumstances. I was very fortunate in that when I started at the Queensland Theatre Company, it was formed while I was at university, and the director saw some of us younger actors in our early 20s and gave us a 3-year contract. So I started off with, I don't know, 24 plays, 8 plays a year. Then I decided, I'd done a workshop with a graduate from the Lecoq School in Paris, and I knew that that's where I wanted to go. So I went and studied for 3 years in France. And then I got a job back at the QTC through a very good English actor who was doing King Lear, and he wanted me to play the fool. And then I just kept picking up jobs, and then I joined another company. And then when that company finished, I thought, well, I just don't want to freelance anymore because it's going to feel like I'm plateauing. So I became the director of a young people's theatre company. So the only really substantial times I've been out of work was in and around those seasonal kind of shifts, I suppose, where I remember being a dresser for the Australian Opera at one point, which was just hilarious to see. Opera singers backstage are just such different beasts to what anyone in this room would be like. You know how we think and we move in and we prepare for the entrance and all that. And they're back there and the orchestra's going, and they're back there going, right up to the entrance. And they just go, bang. It's hilarious. But no, there were, if there were moments of adversity, it was sometimes even in work. I remember in the early days of the 70s, we were just starting to find an Australian voice in playwriting, and the beginnings of an Australian style, perhaps, that was not from our, imposed English heritage. And I remember doing The Imaginary Invalid, the Molière play, with an English director. And I just remember him saying once, we used to break for tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I just thought that was so stupid. We had work to do. But he said, I've never really seen white-hot acting on the Australian stage. And I thought that could be possibly true, but I'd seen, there was this wonderful revue and burlesque performer, an Englishman, Gordon Chater, who was on television on a weekly variety show that did, I thought, some of the most brilliant clowning and character work I've ever seen anyone do. And I thought, it is here, It's what I was saying earlier about the traveling tent show, that it might have felt like I grew up in a wasteland, but I saw the Toowoomba Philharmonic Light Opera Society's amateur production of Oklahoma, And it blew my head off when I was 8. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could still I'll do a bit of it if you like.
All right.
No.
Oh, what a beautiful
It
morning.
was amazing. It was amazing. So I thought, well, can't fuck you really about about white hot acting. I said, well, we're a culture. We've got talent. We've got great opera singers. We've got some great novelists. So that always became an underlying driving force that hopefully one day we could take not only an Ionesco play, but an obscure Ionesco play as created by an Australian company and play it in the commercial arena of Broadway and win a Tony. But the seeds of that go really back to like 1974.
Broadway debut. Now, Mark Sean, there you are. I think we sort of heard your aha moment in the movies with Shine, the story you were saying about getting recognized, but maybe not. What was your aha moment in your career when you realized everything was going to change for you as an actor, that you had finally arrived? Was there a moment?
Is it an aha? Or is it a aha? Aha. I don't know. I suppose, you know, it would have to be like being in the fine line offices and hearing that I actually was nominated for an Oscar was like, I thought, how my mother will never understand what this means. Because she thinks Spencer Tracy wins Oscars, or you know what I mean? It could make no sense at all. And there was no precedent apart from Peter Finch, but he was English.
Okay, now Lauren Michaels has about 12 questions here. Which one's Lauren? Right there. Hi, okay. So the first one is, which role was the most challenging for you? Good.
I said no to Peter Sellers for a year, mainly because I was extremely frightened of it. And also because I thought, physically, I bear no resemblance. He's shorter, rounder, hairier. I mean, he's a full-on hair coat back guy. Nothing. He's a genius. He's beloved. He's an icon. He's one of the, you know, great clowns of the cinema. And I just ran away from it. And then a year later, Stephen Hopkins, the director, came back to me and said, look, I really want you to do it. And in that time, I'd started doing Pirates. And I thought, you know, the biggest thing was I'd heard the names of maybe 4 other people that the script for Peter Sellers had gone out to. All really remarkable actors. But I thought, gosh, they're nothing like Peter Sellers. They're even more different than I am, you know. And that was when the penny dropped, that I thought, I really just have to invent this guy. And the strongest thing I said to Stephen, the director, was, when we do the bits from the films, we have to make them absolutely forensic in timing and detail and look, you know. And then the rest of it is kind of an invention. And it only really occurred to me on a daily basis, every time I went into the makeup van, pretty much every day, it was a completely new. I was either 35 and quite chubby with, you know, silicone pieces and all of that, or I was dressed up as the Duchess from The Mouse That Roared, or I was Clouseau, or I was playing Miriam Margolyes, who was playing my mother. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, that's what this role is about. This guy is a complete mosaic of, there's no center. He has that fabulous line about, I used to have a personality, but I had it surgically removed. Oh, what have I done?
Oh, that was just the water. That was interesting about Peter Sellers and playing a real-life person. You've done that with several people, obviously David Helfgott, Lionel. Is there more of a responsibility for you as an actor when you're playing a real-life person? Is that just more a difficult thing?
Well, it varies. Trotsky was one, and I managed to, somehow we tracked down some very private home movies of Trotsky when he was in Mexico City, which was fantastic, to actually just hear him speak and watch him having a picnic and stuff like that, you know. And people kind of, I don't know, they know what he looks like, or they have an idea of what he might have been sort of like. David Helfgott was a little more of an invention, even though I had a lot of direct access, but no one knew what he... See, I wanted to pluck all my hair out because he's quite bald. And the cinematographer said, you know, your scalp will never look like an authentic bald person's scalp under the scrutiny of the lens. Walsingham, I think there's one portrait in the National Gallery, and I looked at that and I thought, oh, well, you know, we can approximate something like that. But and Sellers was not uninteresting because he was such a gadget freak. He loved all the new toys that would come out, and he loved spending the money that he was making on, you know, the latest equipment. So he had in fact filmed an enormous amount of his life, private life, and him doing. He did this great sketch. He used to hang out with Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, and they'd film really crazy sketches together, where he'd come out and say, "Hello, I am a quick change artiste," and he'd be taking his coat off, and he'd go, "I'll be back in one moment." He'd run out behind the screen, and you'd see clothes flying around. Oh no, you say, "I'm going to turn myself into Princess Margaret," you know. You go around, and you see the clothes come out, and then she'd just come out around the other side and like that, and bow. It was hilarious. Hilarious.
Wow. That's all on film? You filmed? Wow. All right, Bradley Weber, how do you remember your lines, dialogue? Is there a process that works best? Bradley, where are you? Bradley's out rehearsing his lines. Oh, over there. Okay.
You know, look, in the old days, in my 20s and 30s, you know, particularly if you were in a repertory company, we would be doing a show at night and then rehearsing in the daytime. We'd still go clubbing till 4 in the morning. And I don't remember ever once having to really seriously pick up the script and embed the lines. But I have noticed more recently, I'd say, well, certainly, no, it was even with Shine when I was 44 or something, they had written his dialogue a little shorter than it should have been. And I'd been listening to so many audio tapes, and I'd typed all the audio tapes out so I could see what his speech patterns were like, because he would hit these amazing spirals and recurring themes and clang associations where a certain word would trigger another little sub-thought or whatever. And the writer said, yes, we couldn't write page-long monologues because the financiers would think, why does this guy talk so much? And I said, you know, I don't want to make it any longer. I just want to make it faster. And I kind of really learnt those lines as if I was doing a play and had them completely under my belt long before we got in front of a camera. Not to kill the spontaneity of it, but to know that once I started going, there was no time to think, you know what I mean? And with plays now, when I did Exit the King or Pseudolus, I started learning them, 6-8 weeks before rehearsals, so that on the rehearsal room floor, I suppose it's to do with memory. I mean, it takes longer to get them to sink in some ways, but I also like having the facility to spend as much time in rehearsal playing and discovering rather than memorizing, or because you can't get the momentum of a piece going if you're calling for a line all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Sort of in line with that, Rob, where's Rob? Hopefully there's one Rob here. Hi, Rob. How much preparation goes into your work on your voice when preparing for a role? Your characters tend to be strong vocally, and I'm curious if there's any technique you employ to getting your voice in condition to color your characters the way you do.
Well, again, it varies. I met Barbara Barclay, who's a really wonderful dialect coach and voice teacher. She's sort of famous for turning Renee Zellweger into Bridget Jones, and she's great getting Americans to sound like people from a very specific part of London. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I worked with her on that, and then subsequently we worked on all of the pirate films, Munich. There's been about 8 or 9 films. So a lot of that, the Peter Sellers film. Now we did that in the Caribbean on my down days of not shooting the Curse of the Black Pearl. I just had every Goon Show tape, every Peter Sellers film, and she said, I'm going to have to get your voice to be 2 or 3 tones, your mid note, higher than what it naturally is. You're a baritone. So we did a lot of vocal preparation for that, and the fact that I had to learn, 34 accents or something. Oh. So that required some very serious, prep time. And then when I did the musical, I worked with the musical director for maybe 2 months before rehearsal started, just so I could really, I had to sing higher than I could, expand the range and everything.
This is Martin. Where's Martin? Hi, Martin. You played such an amazing array of both fictional and real characters. If money was no object at all, no obligations to studios, etc., what would be your dream role or project?
Rupert Murdoch.
Oh. Not for 20th Century Fox.
No. No. There was a script floating around about that a couple of years ago by that rather brilliant English team that wrote The Thick of It. They had a film too called In the Loop.
Oh, In the Loop, yeah. He's also doing Veep for HBO. That writer.
Yeah. But that story hasn't found its end yet.
Wow, that'd be interesting.
But it would be a pretty interesting if there was a biopic. I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, that would be great. Jill Kathleen, there you are. She saw Exit to King on Broadway. Awesome, by the way, she says. Do you prepare differently for something so crazy as Ionesco versus a film based more in reality? I've
probably always gravitated more towards a comic repertoire on stage, I think. That's not completely true, but those kind of roles that I spoke about, the clowning, classical parts. In that play, the king is dying, and Ionesco has him fall over about 30 times. It's a brilliant kind of slapstick burlesque routine that he just cannot get up. It's hilarious. And people used to say, oh, you must do hot yoga for an hour before the show, and you're so limber, and, I am fairly loosely put together. But in that, you may remember, in that show, I wore a very huge ermine-lined cloak that was actually probably about 5 meters. The tails were huge. 10 minutes after being on stage in that was a hot yoga session. So I didn't have to do it, because if I'd warmed up for that play, I would have been wrecked.
Okay, Napoleon is here with us today. Napoleon Tabal, right there, hi. Good, I'm glad you asked this, because I wanted to hear him talk about this movie, and we sort of skipped over it. And it was another Oscar nomination for Geoffrey Rush. How was it working with the talented and brilliant minds of Tom Hooper, the director, and Colin Firth on The King's Speech?
You know, sometimes you just get too lucky. You know, the moment that you might know the story. The script actually arrived, the play script of the story arrived on my front doorstep in Melbourne, because somebody in the neighbourhood was the sister of the woman who ran this theatre company in suburban London, who wanted to alert me to the fact that this play script had been written, and there was a very good part for an Australian character. I read the play script, which I didn't particularly like that much, because it was as much about Churchill and Cosmo Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as well as about Bertie and Logue and everything. And it just felt a bit too top-heavy or something. But there was something about the fascination of the imperial world of the Duke of York and his difficulty, and the confidence and the assurance of the colonial world of this speech therapist, that I thought had the seeds of a really interesting clash. And so my agent, we started working on it, and I became an exec producer on it, and started to help out with the casting and putting it together. Just because, for me, it was a rare opportunity to play an Australian character of such interesting dimensions in an international film. I couldn't think of, even all through the promotion of it, the only other example I could think of was Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder. Sort of playing Russ, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe. I don't know. So, and then Tom Hooper came on board, who had I'd seen John Adams, and I just loved that he loved the sound of what 18th century floorboards sounded like. You know what I mean? That there was a credible reality to people's dirty wigs and just a nice authenticity.
Attention to detail.
Yeah. And I think the fact that he saw the film, he so consciously wanted to avoid, the Americans love seeing films about the British royal family because it'd be so marvellous to ride in those coaches and live in plush castles and all of that. And he really wanted to make it something not like that, where you thought, this poor guy lives in one of the most dysfunctional families of the 20th century. And his life in the palace is a nightmare, you know, because of his vulnerabilities and having the kingship forced on him. But even when we were filming it, I would say that Colin and I had maybe 4 or 5 scenes that were generally 8 to 11 pages long. Films never have that, unless it's My Dinner with Andre. You know, and I would say to Tom, is this going to hold? I mean, are people going to want to watch 2 middle-aged men sitting in a room talking, and one of them's a stutterer? You know? And he said, you know, it'll hold. And we shot, by the end of 2 weeks, we'd shot nearly half the film. Wow. Because we did all those scenes in my office first, you know what I mean? And that used to annoy me, because when it then got up in the Oscar race, everyone started calling it Oscar bait. And I went, there's no way, no one on that film had any expectation from the beginning and making it, this is where it's going to head. We were interested in a pretty interesting story between a king and a guy from the colonies, you know what I mean? Right. And it was a really nice cast. Helena was fantastic, I think, as the Queen Mother. And Tom kind of, I thought, avoided all the sentimentality and pitfalls of what a biopic can always fall prey to. Do you know what I mean? So yes, it's one of those words that's around a lot now. You know, I mean, it's people. I don't know. They feel as if a certain genre of film comes up, and if you look at what is it this year? The 85th Oscars.
86th.
If you looked at every winner every year, you couldn't say this is Oscar bait. They're all so different.
Yeah, The Artist, black and white silent movie.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hardly
for
Oscar
sure.
bait.
Yeah.
King's Speech the year before that. Slumdog Millionaire the year before that. These are all movies that actually are. It's a miracle they get made in the first place. You know, it takes the dedication of filmmakers to want to make these, because you work with the Hollywood studios too. They're not really interested in anything but you know, Disneyland rides.
And the word bait, I mean, bait is what you give a dog that you don't like. Why would you want to present the Academy with a piece of poisoned meat?
It's one way of putting it. Well, it's a great movie. I wish we could sit here all day and talk about all of these, because there were some more questions about other movies, but I think we covered a lot. And, you know, I just want to know one more thing. What do you have next for us? I mean, The Book Thief's fantastic. Got to go out and see it. But what are you going to work on? What are you working on now, or what's coming
You
up?
promise you won't laugh.
Okay.
I'm going to play Ra, the sun god of Egypt,
Wow. Okay.
because I just think it'll look really great on the CV.
All right. Well, we look forward to that one.
Yeah.
And all of your work. Let's thank Geoffrey Rush.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for coming.